Right, okay. This is going to be perhaps longer than the other episodes. I've only just finished writing out this whole thing. I actually recorded this multiple times whilst I was writing it, but now that I'm finished writing it, it's 25 pages, so we're going to be here a while. I certainly have a lot more to say. This episode has some stuff that confirms parts of my and the fanbase's theories, but even more so, this episode isn't my favourite. I'm going to repeat this throughout the episode, since I know some people skip the intro, and I don't want to seem like a downer, but I hate being negative about anything, especially something I like. I always feel the need to point out flaws, but I always temper it with trying to find anything good in anything I can consume. I really have to remind myself to do that, though, here, since the problems in this episode are so big that it nearly made me bail on this whole scene. Not just the reviews, Hazbin itself. Nothing in this episode sat right with me, and coming right off the heels of the confusion of the last episode and the throes of me being sick and trying to write the Lackadaisy episode, the energy levels were at 0, and I genuinely thought that the show would fall so short that I would end up hating it. I'll be as kind as I possibly can in this episode, but this is my least favourite of the series so far by a long way. Not just from my usual it could be more well-made gripes about animation quality or musical structure, but from a moral standpoint too. Let's get into it. Episode 6. Welcome to Heaven. Plot. We open on Charlie overpacking for her one-day trip to heaven, and Vaggie trying to temper her idiosyncrasies. Here we see more of Vaggie's reluctance to go to heaven, as she badly lies about having better things to do. She's a bad liar, though, and ends up relenting to Charlie. We next see Angel bursting back through the doors of the hotel, and we immediately get my first problem with the episode. Now, as I said in the intro, I hate being negative about things, especially good things like this show, but one of the most consistent problems I've had with the show so far is how they pick and choose when and to whom trauma is a valid concern. In the past episodes I've complained about how Charlie should have been more upset about Angel's outburst, since it was tailored to jab at her trauma specifically, but it was shrugged off with a funny "wow, isn't Charlie emotional" moment. Here we know the show cares about Angel's trauma, though. We've had a whole episode to focus on it. And yet in this scene, Angel comes home complaining like his boss just made him stack shelves in an annoying way for an hour of overtime after work. It's like a sitcom. Watch, I'll show you.
Oh, fuck.
You look messy. What happened to you?
It's who happened to me. And the answer is everyone. Twice. Val had me working 16 hours straight on a fucking whim.
See? We learn later in the episode that his workday involved him being tortured. But here we treat it as, oh, Mr. Johnson kept me back an hour after class today and made me write out lines on the board. If they're trying to go for Angel is desensitized to this now, it's really not hitting. Especially since we get a focus on how his trauma is still affecting him later in this very episode. It's literally one of the only good parts of this episode, and it's in direct conflict with this scene. The way Angel describes his tormentor and abuser here is how you would describe an annoying customer at the shop where you work. It's really very strange to me. Then the wall blows up to reveal Cherry Bomb. To be entirely fair to this show, this joke about how the wall is always blown up when they have functional doors, and how it's always the same wall, is actually hilarious. I like it. So Cherry shows up with a brand new snazzy Aussie accent. How she's suddenly gone down under since the pilot is anyone's guess.
Angie, you bitch! You've been texting me depressing shit all day. Figured we could tear shit up like old time.
Head trauma giving her a new accent, maybe? That sometimes happens. Anyway, she's here to visit Angel. Not sure why she needed to blow the wall for that. At least Sir Pentious had beef with the hotel when he blew part of it up. I do like how we hear her theme coming back in here.
What up, hoes?
Holy shit, Cherry Bomb? Long time no see.
Hey, thanks for the backup, Angie.
You kidding? This is the best action I've seen in ages.
Where you been anyway?
Also, long time no see in this case is about a month or 3. since we know they last met during the pilot. I actually had to do some maths to figure out how long it's been, and the evidence that we have is that in the last episode Charlie says they only have a couple of months until the angels come, which is either literally 2 months, meaning it's been 4 months since episode 1 in the last episode, or more metaphorical, meaning it's any time between 6 and 2 months. In this episode, we learn that we have a month before the extermination. In the next episode, we learn that Pentius's eggs heard about things happening with Carmilla months ago. This is all linked to the fact that when Angel says long time no see, and my brain says no it isn't, it says a lot about how the show handles time. In 8 episodes, 6 months pass. How much time has passed between any of these episodes is very strange. It could be a day or a week. I can imagine in the next episode Charlie crying for a month after this episode, honestly, like fits her character, but with the way everyone else is responding, it could be a day or 2. The reaction of the hotel guests implies that it's new information, it's so fresh to be the same week or even a day. They really don't handle time very well in this show. I think he's right about it being a long time. It's been about 5 months by my maths, but it feels like it's only been a week. Anyway, Cherry says that Angel has been texting her depressing content, but wasn't he busy in a shoot for 18 hours straight?
Val had me working 16 hours straight on a fucking whim.
He just got home. When did he have time to do that? Cherry suggests that they go out and wreck the town before handing Charlie a bomb she forgot to extinguish, which Vaggie calmly disposes of. I like this moment. It provides a solid characterization for Charlie, Vaggie, and Cherry. Plus, it's just funny. Here I notice that Cherry's bombs are full of hearts, and she blew a hole in the wall that's heart-shaped. I don't know what this theming means, though. While Cherry is trying to convince Angel that the last thing he needs right now is sleep, Charlie cuts in and introduces herself. Cherry wonders at the fact that Angel doesn't invite more of his friends over when he has such charming company as Charlie, and she completely misses this sarcasm being thrown at her. While the show portrays Charlie as a killjoy here, I will say she's totally in the right about Cherry needlessly blowing up her wall for a cool entrance, and the nonchalant way she brings it up here reads as both Charlie's usual soft touch about criticism, whilst also reading as a level of snark that I've really wanted to see from Charlie for a long while. I've always seen her as a nice person pushed to her limit by her circumstances, and we see more of this in the pilot than we do in the main show. This show chooses a different side of her, when it chooses to show anything at all. Pilot Charlie is always on her breaking point, but when she does break, it's a depressive spiral. Series Charlie breaks more often than not with a display of anger. With the show's mismanagement of character screen time, we only see snippets of this throughout the first series, and only in episode 8 do we get a distinct focus on her angry side. While it's somewhat of a departure from her pilot characterization, it still makes sense. The more things go downhill, the more she relates to the people that evil things are happening to, the more her anger would come out compared to her sadness. But the problem I have with it is that we see so little of her anger and basically none of her sadness except one scene in the next episode. We have the setup to see it, like in episode 4. I've complained about this in episode 4, where Angel's outburst should have sent her into a depressive spiral, like this scene in the pilot, or she should have snapped at Angel and then forgiven him when he apologizes, which he still hasn't done, but we get none of this. Snarky Charlie is still very welcome, though, even if it's only my reading of this scene. Anyway, Charlie begins to insert the rest of the hotel guests into Cherry's night out, and when Cherry protests, Charlie shoves a bundle of money into her hands and she shuts up, immediately, asking everyone to come along. This is the first time we ever see Charlie using her royal status successfully. If the entirety of Hell thinks that the Morningstars are clowns, throwing their money around to improve conditions in Hell would certainly change that in a heartbeat, in my opinion. But they seem to forget this aspect, either in law or the writers forget this. I also love that we get more of Nifty's niftying here. Her just vibrating when she's hyped about something is a wonderful through line for her character. Also, Angie Pog, top text, bottom text. Not a fan of how his face freezes like this for a bit, though. Now the portal to heaven is open and Charlie runs through it, dragging Vaggie and waving to everyone. Cherry questions none of this. It's this scene here where we see this portrait of the morning stars I showed in the last episode. It's also here that I'd like to mention how many portraits were in the hotel in the pilot, and how few there are now. It seems that all the family portraits were teleported to Lucifer's place. I'm not sure how I feel about this redesign in general. This interior seems like it would fit the hotel as it appears at the end of the series, rather than this hotel. Penchas suddenly realizes Cherry has arrived, and goes into villain mode, threatening her with a JoJo pose as her arch-nemesis. Cherry is over it, and tells him that he can come along to the night of fun too. Penchas seems to take this the wrong way, and really sounds like he's taking this as her asking him out. I can't tell if the subtitles are right here. It sounds like he says out back for fun, but the hesitation between out and back doesn't work in this context, and makes me think that he said out like for fun, which makes more sense with his delivery. We know the subtitles have been wrong before.
Oh, you and me are going out, like, for fun?
Penchas frets about not knowing what to do or what to wear, which is very relatable. I love the use of more Aussie slang here. It fits Cherry a lot.
What do I do? What do I wear?
Don't fucking touch me, you munted dickhead.
Her crushing Penchas's hand, and him blushing at the physical contact, is the beginning of a character arc which I don't think I like. Cut to heaven. There's this massive set of eyes above the gate. Okay, is it time? Is it time to have the talk? Yeah? Okay. It's time to have the talk about the eyes in Hazbin Hotel. This show has a consistent theme in the mise-en-scène and character design. The whole design philosophy is eyes. Many characters have something odd about their eyes. Angels have one eye covered on their masks, and yeah, that's a mask, we'll get to that later in this episode. Vaggie is missing an eye, ironically, as we'll see later. Angel has odd eyes, Nifty and Cherry only have one, Penchas has a bunch of them all over his body, his hat even has one. In Hell of a Boss, we also see that Stolas' hat has eyes too. Vox has his weird hypnotoad eye. When we meet Sarah and Emily, they both have many eyes before turning into these more mundane forms. And when Sarah is upset later, we see her sprout even more eyes. Plus, heaven and hell have eyes everywhere, in the walls of many buildings, and on the tops of gates and things. It's very clear that eyes are a distinctive thematic element in both heaven and hell. But why? Well, it would make sense that heaven would be keeping an eye on hell, so that's a clear thematic element. But actually, no. This is something I'll get into at the end of the episode, but hell has been left to fester and ignored up to the point where an angel was killed. Heaven is actually more of a hellish surveillance state, if anything. So the eyes make sense there, right? Well, we see so little of heaven that I don't actually know if it has the same amount of eye motifs outside of decoration. In hell, these eyes seem much more functional. Like, they look like they're growing out of the buildings, like they're organic. They're not part of the decoration like they mostly are in heaven. I'll get into why this is more of a problem at the end of the episode, or in my Series 1 wrap-up, probably, but it's a consistent problem with the world-building of this show. God, we're only 3 minutes into this episode. What the f... So Charlie and Vaggie appear in heaven, and Charlie is stunned by the visuals, while Vaggie isn't very impressed. Here we meet Saint Peter? That's a strange thing. At first I thought he was a generic angel until the subtitles called him out by name. Saint Peter. So, heavenly human saints exist in this world. And again, we'll go into this more in my wrap-up, but it's odd how these elements from real theology are kind of picked and chosen. St. Peter struggles to find Charlie's name in the book until she mentions her father, Lucifer Morningstar, booked the appointment, to which he starts freaking out.
Oh, fuck, yeah, oh, yikes, am I right?
It's really odd to hear a saint say this, but I suppose Lucifer is still a sore spot for the angels. Suddenly, Sarah, the High Seraphim, very creative name, and Emily, the Other Seraphim, no, that's really her title, appear, as I said, turning into these more mundane forms. It's odd. as this descending scene implies that they rarely visit heaven itself and usually reside closer to the light than the rest of the residents. But they are only ever seen in the city of heaven from this point on, maybe because the hell situation is an all-hands-on-deck kind of thing after this episode. But they're not observing heaven or hell, they're not curbing descent in heaven, they're just kind of sitting around. Granted, in this scene they may have been discussing something. Emily looks like she's mid-something. They come and welcome the two, quashing St. Peter's quibbles, and he begins a musical number to show off heaven. So I'm not a massive fan of this number. For once, it's one of the only musical numbers in the show that actually has a decent build-up and beginning.
Welcome to heaven.
Dearly beloved, it is my pleasure to say unto thee, welcome to heaven. Oh.
But it's extremely generic, doesn't really serve a purpose, and is over in like 2 seconds. It seems like more of a jumbled way to show off all these cool character designs and not really much else. The fact that St. Peter does a kind of stage freeze while being held by all these hot people, yes, that's what they're called, seems less like part of the performance and more like lazy animation for the sake of a cool transition. People have been going crazy theory crafting about these character designs though, so maybe it's working for them, but I personally dislike it. People have said that this character, for example, might be related to Angel, but I don't know. There is this admittedly funny moment where Emily grabs Charlie's hand and Vaggy's not very happy about it, but the comedy of the moment is diminished by the fact that her face freezes like this. This is a consistent problem for the show, especially this episode, it seems. They finish the musical number with an actual in-universe stage freeze and a cheesy yeah from St. Peter, with silly over-the-top panting to imply that this number was a lot of physical work. But again, even though this is a performance in-universe that implies they're trying to show off for the hellish visitors, it still kind of feels like it's a performance for us as well. I find this whole number unsettling in a way that I can only describe with this Dan Olsen clip.
Cringe. There's no other word for it. This makes me cringe. It's embarrassing.
Now, as Charlie and Vaggy run past here, we see Adam and Lute, without her mask on, shocked to see them in heaven. I do love the character through-line of these two being connected with electric guitars. Their shocked sound effect is a guitar sting, for example. We also learn later in the series that Adam is also wearing a mask. So why doesn't he take it off in heaven like Lute? How can he eat and drink through the mask? Some people on Reddit suggested that they're hard-light holograms, but if their masks are capable of being damaged or breaking, then they can stop a rib or a straw getting through, unless it's designed to do that. It's a strange inconsistency or an uncertain design element. Lute and Adam hate that these two are up here, and Adam is about to chase them when Lute stops him, tempering his outburst. Adam says that he doesn't want to wait until the next extermination to kill them, but here we get a big lore detail.
Shh, sir. What was the Seraphim's one rule?
No one but the exorcist can know about the exterminations. I know, fine.
The Seraphim are keeping the exterminations a secret from the population of heaven. Only the exorcists know.
Don't fucking shush me, bitch.
Adam's rebuke here is fun. In episode 8 we'll get more into Adam and Lute's relationship, but we really do know that Adam is a commanding, controlling, chauvinistic cackheel of a person. But later in the series we see he has some kind of connection with Lute besides her being his top lieutenant. Wait, Lute, that's why is that why I thought it was just because he likes guitars. I don't... Anyway, I think he likes her because she's fiercely loyal to him, which he likes, but she's also able to bite back, like in this scene. It's not a healthy relationship, but it makes sense for him. Sarah then appears behind them and teleports them to her office and off the street where their conversation can be heard. The animation on Adam's face here is weirdly smooth for some reason, like it's an odd contrast to the jank the show has at times. Sarah answers Lute's question about why Charlie is here by telling them that the exterminations have done nothing to quell the sinners' unrest, and now Lucifer has got himself involved in the situation. In the last episode I wondered how Lucifer still holds sway in heaven, but only now do I kinda get it. They had to put an embassy in hell and ask him for his permission to begin exterminations. This comment about how his mere involvement in the hotel being a threat shows that Lucifer still holds sway. St. Peter being such a generic kind being of an angel, responding to the mere mention of Lucifer like this, suddenly makes sense now. As I said earlier, we learn, and have already seen glimpses, that heaven is a police state, and dissent is quelled violently. Lucifer's influence back in the day might have been such a seed for such dissent that his mere name now carries a heavy weight of state-mandated silencing. You even think about Lucifer, and the seraphim will come. That's how it seems. We don't see much more besides these little controlling hints that we've already seen, unfortunately. Like I said, dissent may be quelled violently, but we don't really see it. It's certainly not on the streets for everyone to see. It's just kind of a hushed thing amongst the heaven-goers. It could also be that the seraphim and the exterminators aren't necessarily the police of this scenario, but are still under the heel of somebody. We'll get into that in the series wrap-up. Sarah is an interesting character. She genuinely wants to do right by her people, much like Charlie or Lucifer in some ways, and she doesn't like the idea of the exterminations very much. It was seemingly pitched to her by Adam, and she only agreed to it because she thought the violence would be restricted to hell. Now that the descent is leaking into heaven, she's questioning the whole thing. I have my theories about the true reason for extermination, but we'll get there.
Keeping heaven safe was my only reason for allowing it.
What do you want from me? I'm just one guy.
Adam's response here is funny. I thought you weren't just one guy, Adam. I thought you were the guy.
Do you know who I am? I'm fucking Adam. I'm the original Dick. All dicks descend from me. I'm fucking Adam. I'm the fucking man, and you're just some fucking clown or something.
You saying you can't handle this without your army of biker babes? I'm being jokingly toxic here, but if anyone actually said this to Adam, it would probably have a distinct effect on his massive yet fragile ego.
Do you know who I am? I'm fucking Adam. I'm the original Dick. All dicks descend from me.
Charlie and Vaggie are in the overnight room in heaven now, and Charlie is freaking out. Apparently, hell doesn't have the nice fluffy animals, but, like, so many beings in hell are dogs or... An angel is extremely fluffy. Is that just really coarse hair or something? It just kind of seems like a throwaway line. Vaggie's not in the mood to explore, of course, and Charlie goes out on her own, still freaking out about all the wonderful things that heaven has to offer. We never really learn what she did while she was away. While she's on her own, Vaggie is visited by Adam and Lute. Here we finally get the reveal that Vaggie is indeed a fallen angel. She was an exorcist who fell. In this flashback we see her sparing a cannibal child during the extermination, and Lute herself removes her wings and blinds her in one eye for being so compassionate to the sinners. I find it a little odd that she removes her helmet just before, this dramatic reveal here. She keeps it off for this whole sequence. It's very weird. It's a common thing in the media. Like, I get that we like to see our protagonists' faces, but keep the helmet on. They exist for a reason. Just one of these days, I want to see a movie where our main character takes off their helmet for a dramatic hero shot, only to catch an arrow in the eye, 1066 style. One thing I really like in this scene is that her undershirt, the one that she wears under her angel armor, or whatever you would want to call it, is actually the same design as her pilot outfit. It almost implies that this is now a canon outfit that she wears sometimes, or at least has worn once. I'm not sure if she'd want to wear it that often after this. We learn that Charlie found her wounded after the extermination and kept her safe and nursed her back to health. I like that this implies that Charlie wanders around hell and tries to help people after the extermination. That really fits her character. This brings up an interesting point as well. Many people question how Vaggie kept this whole angel thing a secret for so long. If her blood is neon yellow, how'd she never get hurt? How'd Charlie never notice this when tending to her wounds? Someone on Reddit gave the extremely reasonable answer that sinners wouldn't even know that angels bleed yellow blood, since a sinner has never seen an injured angel before. Not even Vaggie knew they could be injured. Except that she had to know, because she got injured. A lot in this scene. Either she didn't know sinners could harm angels, and only thought that angels could harm other angels, or she thought that they were under some kind of mystical protection that ended when she showed pity to this child. This whole she didn't know that angels could be hurt is mentioned in the next episode, by the way. We also know that her name is Vaggie because Adam is a massive d-hole and named her after, quote, the best thing ever.
It's why I named you after the best thing ever, Vaggie.
Actually, it's pronounced Vaggie.
No.
Using this knowledge, I will name the next angel I see Chicken Nuggets. This also adds a fun little backing to Angel's joke in episode 1 and many fandom jokes about Vaggie's name.
You're doing great, Vagina.
Cut!
But this also implies that Adam's powers include making exorcists. If he names them, then he has to make them, right? Either they're angels that are born in heaven and recruited into the ranks and given some kind of code name, or mind-wiped and given a new identity, or they're created fresh for the extermination. This gives us some stakes. If enough angels die in the extermination, it'll take a while for those numbers to go back up. However, if Adam makes exorcists, a lot more makes sense. This is why the exterminators are all women, why they're more death metal than the other angels. It's totally his style. He's made an army of subservient emo chicks to help him in his genocidal quest. That just screams this character to me. It seems like the halo is a very important thing for angels, which makes sense, but like it's an object, it can be taken away from them, and it seems to hold some kind of status or value. In this scene, Adam takes away Vaggie's halo, and in the season finale, Lute has Adam's in her hand. Like, it seems like they hold some kind of value or purpose, and it's worth keeping them. Maybe there's only a limited amount of them or something. Even if it's some kind of symbolic value. Strange how only some angels get them, though. I suppose the thrones are high enough in the hierarchy of heaven so as not to need them. Strange how they're under the seraphim in this universe, but... The fact that Adam calls Charlie Lilith's child before he mentions anything about Lucifer is very interesting to me. Most people call her Lucifer's daughter, since he's the king, but Lilith is the more important figure to Adam. It's a little weird that he calls his ex's daughter a hottie.
Think someone as worthless as you landed Lilith's little hottie. Congrats on that, I guess.
Adds a bit of a creep factor to him, I guess. So does his next line, but I do find it hilarious. I also love his facial animation, too.
Their love is vile and blasphemous.
Hot as fuck, though.
Something I've noticed here is how little he refers to women by any other name besides...
I got you again, bitch! And this virtue chick, your words, babe. That's a bitch. Awesome job, Danger Tits. Sorry, sweetie, but try to chillax, babe. Don't fucking shush me, bitch. Hey there, Vagisaurus! I'm not looking for the blonde, babe. I wouldn't forget a bad bitch like you. Lilith's little hottie. Bitch, what up, baby? Low blow, Karen. It's fucking heaven, bitch. Suck it, bitches! You better save the date, cunts. Extermination Day is here, bitches. You dumb bitch! You should have stayed in your place, girly.
Yeah, again, it tells you a lot about him. He threatens Vaggie with telling Charlie about her past. At first, Vaggie isn't too threatened by this until he points out the fact that Vaggie has killed thousands of Charlie's people, and that might sour their relationship. We know Charlie's only driving force now is saving people from extermination, and finding out her girlfriend had a hand in these exterminations would definitely change her opinion. We'll get to that. Adam wants Vaggie back in the fold, and for her to convince Charlie to step away from this whole political situation. Vaggie's very distressed by all this, as you can imagine. Overall, I feel like this massive lore reveal was kinda toothless. Maybe it's because it was so obvious to me. Maybe because the fan base has known, quote-unquote, for years. Maybe it felt a little rushed. More on that later. Oh boy, the court scene. Here we go. At least we get this funny line from Adam.
Saw that you went to my manager. Low blow, Karen.
And also this look from Lute. Hazbin Hotel Reddit, I think you're onto something about Lute. Then again, actually, no. You know what? Never let the Hazbin Hotel subreddit cook. Never. Either way, the court convenes to find if it's possible for a soul to be redeemed. Charlie starts things off while trying to define redemption, but the court doesn't want to hear any definitions. Unfortunately for Charlie, all of her notes are defining things. I don't quite get what's funny about this joke. She's ill-prepared? But we were shown that she was over-prepared for this trip. Is it just meant to be cringe humour? I hate comedy that hinges on making you laugh by making you cringe. I get secondhand embarrassment. It's never funny.
Cringe. There's no other word for it. This makes me cringe. It's embarrassing.
Also, just now noticing the unicorn underneath this seraphim on this carving. Actually, this almost looks like Stella? Maybe a seraphim who's also a peafowl? Quick aside, I only just realised recently, like maybe a few weeks back, that a peafowl is the name for the whole species, while a peahen and a peacock are sex-specific terms. Like a chicken hen and a chicken cock. They're female and male, respectively. How have I survived 25 years on this planet? I'll never know. Anyway, Adam asks for proof that the hotel works, and Charlie says that Angel is making great strides. When Adam poo-poos the idea of Angel being worth redemption, Charlie asks him what it takes to get into heaven. He struggles for a long time trying to come up with anything, and even Sarah pushes him to answer. He writes a silly little list of criteria.
Act selfless, don't steal, stick it to the man. Are you fucking serious?
Even Lute looks unimpressed at this list. Adam says these things got him into heaven, but Adam isn't selfless. He stole the apple, technically, and he only stuck it to the man because he was peer-pressured by his wife and Lucifer. The man in question being the one who is in control of this whole heaven thing. Again, I have to ask, how did he end up here? People say in this version of the biblical events, Adam never actually ate the fruit of knowledge, but I'm not sure about that. I doubt it, frankly, although it is kind of funny to imply that all men don't have the basis of knowledge. That's kind of funny. Sarah agrees that Adam was the first human soul in heaven, but is seemingly unconvinced. Charlie asks the court to check in on Angel to see if he's conforming to Adam's criteria. In hell, the gang are in a club called Consent, a name which Husk approves of. I, however, take issue with the name due to something that happens later. We'll get there. We see more of Nifty being nifty here. The moment she doesn't have any cleaning duties to deal with, she becomes an absolute gremlin. It's a nice little moment of levity in this scene that I otherwise hate, and I do not use that word lightly. Pensius tries to cozy up to Cherry by buying her a drink, and when she asks why he gets cold feet and implies that he's buying everyone a drink. This is the beginning of a mildly fumbled triplet joke that will eventually become an excessively fumbled joke. This is where we learn that Angel's silly little overly tiring workday that he mentioned earlier involved him being waterboarded. This is what I was talking about earlier. It also adds a terrifying angle to his situation. Sinners in hell can only be killed by angelic weaponry. Val rips a woman to pieces in episode 2, and they have to wait for her to put herself back together. That is a literal statement, not a figurative one.
But he tore up my best motto, and you know the show can't wait for that unlucky bitch to pull herself back together.
Now Val has complete control of Angel's soul, and Angel must do whatever Val wants of him. Say Val wants to shoot some more hardcore movies than normal. Val could literally have Angel disemboweled, quartered, and burned alive, all while being violated in the most violent ways, and Angel has to endure all of it, presumably being able to feel it as most of his body gets torn to pieces, and then just reform over the next few days, or even hours, and then have to do it all over again, the next day, or even the same day. This is the only time Vivzi's hell has come close to the eternal torment that the place is famous for. More on this in my wrap-up. Cherry tries to cheer Angel up with drugs, and I have to say, I really frickin' hate Cherry Bomb. She's such an awful friend to Angel and a terrible influence. The fact that she's one of the voices singing in the happy little choir in the last episode and not consigned to the nether realm of characters alongside Mimsy is an affront to the human species. Angel needs to pull an Alistair and burn this bridge like Alistair did with Mimsy. We live in a world where Mimsy gets more hate than Valentino and Cherry gets no hate. Do better, humans. Angel refuses the drugs. After Husk chimes in, it's good that Angel listens to Husk somewhat these days. This scene's one saving grace, besides Nifty, is that this beautiful relationship has formed between Husk and Angel, these wonderful little moments. Cherry badmouths Husk for being a level head. She demeans him by calling him a drunk, as if she's not there to lose herself in drink and drugs, and hates that he judges them. He's not. He's trying to help Angel, and it's just that she's too insecure to notice. She talks about Angel's pain more in the context of it affecting her rather than him. She comes to give him a good time, not to improve his mood, but because her phone's been blown up with depressing messages from him.
Andy, you bitch! You've been texting me depressing shit all day.
She tells him to stop talking about Val because it's killing her vibe. She doesn't specifically say that, but "don't let him ruin your night" is framed more altruistically, but she's clearly, visibly sick of hearing about all this.
Angel, enough with the Val talk. He already ruined your whole day. Don't let him ruin your night, too.
She'd rather dope up Angel than help him, and she cuts off the only voice of reason in the room because he's also killing the vibe. This hits me on a visceral level, but we'll discuss that when we get to the big thing. While Angel denies the drugs, which is good progress, he does accept the alcohol. It's not the worst thing. I'm okay with this as long as it's not a pattern. Drinking is fun in moderation. But Cherry still keeps on with the drug angle.
Come on, bitch. If you've really been working that hard, you deserve a little R&R and some THC or maybe PCP with DMT.
Seriously, screw Cherry Bomb. All my homies hate Cherry Bomb. Penchas comes back with a shot that he bought Cherry and plays it off as buying everyone a shot. The second in our devil's triad of a bungled triplet joke. I'll have to brace myself for the third punchline. I'll take the time to say again, I'm not a fan of this Penchas likes Cherry angle. Not just because I hate Cherry. We'll get there. In Heaven, Adam plays off Angel's drinking as a sign that he's not improving, but Charlie frames it much in the same way I do, as blowing off steam with friends after a hard day. Adam now tries to play his trump card by calling on Vaggy's opinion, and she panics and excuses herself. Charlie asks the court to keep watching, and they allow it. Quick aside, this episode kind of reminds me of episodes like The Trial of a Time Lord, or those low-effort episodes of The Simpsons where they get a bunch of little clips from previous seasons and are like, here's a fun thing that happened. Clip shows are the level of quality we're on in this episode. However, this episode is on the top tier of clip show episodes, more like Trial of a Time Lord than Troy McClure telling you about that time Bart did a thing. A good clip show will use the cutaways to further the plot and use the narrative framing of the clips to its advantage. Trial of a Time Lord was thrown together quickly by a husband and wife team in like a weekend because the other writer quit. That's where the ramshackled elements of its vibe came from, not from low effort. This is on that level. There's effort on display, but it still reads to me a little like they had to throw this together because they weren't sure how to move the plot along. We cut back to the bar and they're all thoroughly drunk, even Nifty and Penchas. Two odd things that add to the ramshackle element of this episode is that Husk has a shot in his hand here, but is handed one here in the same hand, and then he silently mouths a word that just, there's no word there. What? The fact that Cherry's leitmotif dies out here as Husk fails to say a line really draws attention to it. It's just sloppy. It almost reads like they forgot or couldn't afford to get Keith in for one more day to fix this line. It's weird. Nifty is clearly far gone, and Angel does the responsible thing and tries to take the booze off of her. Cherry chastises Angel harshly for this and just adds another notch onto the shame pole that I'm going to build of Cherry. Angel immediately goes to stop Nifty from being Nifty while drunk, which is more dangerous than Nifty on her own if you can believe it. This is the sort of guy you want around you when you're drinking. The sort of person I wish I'd had in the past. Nifty being Nifty, though, she's too fast for him, and rushes off to try and steal cleaning chemicals. Angel stops her before she can mix up some chlorine gas. However, Cherry stops him from stopping Nifty. She calls him a nerd for not wanting Nifty to end up in trouble like he has been in the past. Cherry, you're one of the only main cast members besides Alistair who deserves to be in hell. Angel goes to help Nifty finally and accidentally calls her a mess, and because of her obsession with cleanliness and her inebriation, this makes her cry. Despite being a little rough around the edges, Angel proves once again that he is an angel by calming her down in a really cute way, offering to let her play with the kitty, aka Husk. Husk allows this, because he's also an absolute angel, even if he protests at the inconvenience. This is how you deal with this. If someone's in a bad state, you put your good time on hold, and you help them. It's a decent thing to do. Vibes are not worth trauma. Even if you complain while doing it, this is a good thing. People in the real world need to learn this. Okay, here we go. The third and final punchline in our triplet, leading us into the worst joke ever. I never thought I'd have to put a trigger warning before a joke, but here it is. The show missteps so badly that here we are. You may think I'm overreacting, but this joke has triggered my PTSD, and not in the internety, oh, I remember that time I got chewed out by my boss for 5 minutes, and now I have PTSD over it. Not that kind, either. I mean, diagnosed post-traumatic stress disorder. Discussing this joke will require me being somewhat vulnerable with you guys, but you need to hear this to understand why this show drops the ball so hard, and why I dislike it, personally. Ready? Here we go. Pentious, courageous from the drink, asks Cherry to accompany him to the club's private rooms. She asks why, and he says that he's inviting everyone there. Then he's dragged away into the private room despite his protestations. Funny little triplet joke, right? He kept using the same get-out clause to try and dodge Cherry's questions and his own feelings for her, but he ended up in hot water, right? No, this is not funny. This is sexual assault on screen, and we are being invited to laugh at it. We finally get to my biggest problem with the show in general, and it's a knock-on issue. I'll delve more into this in the wrap-up, but the show has a problem with pacing. Stay with me here, it's a bit of a leap. Like I said, it's a knock-on issue. It's trying to cram so much into these 8 episodes that we flash from one point to another very fast. The main issue with this is that we skim over what should be heavy-hitting moments. Charlie's anger at Angel's prodding her trauma in episode 4 is ignored and skipped over with a joke. I've complained about this before. It's not the only time we've ignored what should be an interesting character moment for the sake of the main plot, or the more interesting characters, or a joke. I was worried in episode 1 of my review that Charlie would end up being a background character in her own show, and I've been proven right. This is a symptom of the same problem, but it is by far the worst incident. The show is skipping over so much and being so blind to the impact of the events on our characters and being so adamant to make jokes that it ignores them frequently, putting in jokes to plug up the gaps that this ignorance causes. However, here, it's used at the worst possible time. This mentality has made them make a joke out of one of our main characters being sexually assaulted on screen, and that is not okay. I don't think this was intentional. It reads more to me that the writers didn't even realise what they did here. They had a quota of jokes and a quota of songs, and they had to add each to an episode, and they became blind to the emotional impact of events on our characters unless it's tied to the plot. I'll get into this more in episode 8 and in the wrap-up, but Pentious gets a rough deal from this show. He's quickly become one of my favourite characters, up there with Alistair, and I hate the way the show treats him. There's a mentality in this world that, when it comes to sex especially, or anything in general, saying yes once and then taking it back still means a yes. This scene supports that consent-shattering idea. While this advert from my home country about consent being equated to a cup of tea is mocked relentlessly, it raises some great points. If someone says they want something and then changes their mind, you don't force it on them. If they're unsure, you don't take that as a yes. Even so, unconscious people don't want tea is still a very silly line, so I agree with the rigorous jokes that are being made about this advert, but still.
They said yes then, sure. But unconscious people don't want tea.
Cherry encourages the group to do this sort of thing more often, meeting up for drinks and stuff, instead of trying to improve. Husk says this.
The hotel isn't a problem in his life. It's...
Cherry. It's Cherry, Husk. Cherry is the problem here. No hesitation.
Valentino.
Exactly.
Angel says Valentino instead, which... Yeah, it's true. Valentino's more of a problem in his life than she is, but I just hate her so much right now. Turns out Angel isn't filling in Husk's hesitation, though. He's actually here. Valentino is in the bar, being his usual awful self.
You're gorgeous. Do you need a job? How many dicks can you suck?
Unfortunately for the group trying to leave before Val sees, Nifty runs off in his direction. Here's another reason why I think the show didn't really realise what it just did to Pentious. Angel and Husk, the two responsible people in the room, were ready to abandon Pentious while he was being assaulted because they wanted to escape Val. Now, getting out before Val sees them is a great thing to do, but get my boy out of this place too. You can argue that they didn't see what happened to Pentious, but he loudly announced it to the room. They appeared right after. He would have been in their eye line. The show has been very consistent about Angel and Husk being the decent characters in this scene, so the fact that they do nothing here implies to me that the writers don't know what they were doing to poor Pentious. Like, if they'd have seen this happen, they would have stopped it. If they were going to leave, they probably would have taken him with them. Even if he's like the least cohesive member of the group, they have a rapport after episode 3 now. So, you see my issue. I'm sure that this is probably just they didn't even realise. Angel finally catches up to Nifty, but is seen by Val. Nifty is...
Who's this Chiquita? You bringing me fresh meat? Oi!
Nifty to Val, and he comments that someone must be into that. I refer you to my previous comment about the Hazbin subreddit. He stands up to him, though, cussing him out and exploiting a loophole in their contract. Val owns him in the recording studio, but he's his own man outside of it. And he doesn't have to take Val's BS out here. He knows he'll be reprimanded, terribly, next time he goes into work, but he doesn't care. This is worth it. Husk, being the great help to Angel that he is, pats him on the back for this. Nifty does what we all wish we could do, and hurts Val. Cherry comments that calling these people friends is a bit much for Angel, but he says he means it, and he invites Cherry to join him at the hotel. For once, Cherry actually supports Angel's decision to better himself, finally being a supportive influence for the first time ever, and then goes on to say that she doesn't need improvement. She's fine, and to prove it, she's going to sleep with a random stranger during a bender. The universal sign of a well-adjusted individual. She's insecure, selfish, verbally abusive, seemingly takes any helping hand as one that may attack her or insult her, and hides it all with aggression and substances. Yeah. She's doing fine. These are the signs of a hurt person, but this does not excuse any of her behaviours in the show thus far. She has chosen to continue the cycle of abuse and hurl obscenities at anyone who tries to break that cycle, because she's insecure about not being strong enough to break it herself. That's my reading, at least. That weakness comes not from trauma, but a character flaw in and of herself, because she likes hurting others to cope with her problems, rather than seeing the harm she inflicts as the same pain that she experienced herself, and that makes her evil enough to deserve a place in hell, trauma or no trauma. Those who choose to hurt others because they're too spineless to take that harder step to improve themselves and settle for the quick and simple shots of pleasure they get from substances, impulsive sex, dragging everyone else around them down to their level and making sure that they aren't the only ones with trauma, these are the lowest of the low. This whole scenario with Val is another good moral lesson for the show, which makes me think even more that the Pentious thing was a fluke, which hurts all the more when, as they leave, Pentious finally rejoins them, breathless and ragged after his abuse. The first thing he asks about is Cherry, only to see her retreating into a private room with a random stranger. Again, this is played off as a joke. The whole reason this club scene gets me so riled up is that I've been right here. I've been in a bar that does all this, and I've seen the sort of people it attracts. The sort of people who will not stop their night of partying to help a stranger in need. The sort of people who crave meaningless sex but have no cares about the actual people behind the warm flesh they're using. I have seen someone I love retreating into a private room with someone who isn't me. Someone who refuses to change their ways despite knowing their actions hurt people, and who treats every helping hand as a weapon against them. I know exactly where Penchas is coming from here. Thank God I was never assaulted or anything, but I was still heavily traumatized by my experience in this kind of place, and it pains me to see the show treating it as a situation to be laughed at. You can call my hatred of Cherry and my love of Penchas projection. You can call my harsh criticisms of this scene emotionally fueled, but I'm perfectly capable of detaching my own personal feelings from my critique. Let's take the bungled triplet joke, for example, just to separate my emotional trauma from this. It's not funny if you think about it for more than a second, and it's morally dubious, at best. The setup is here. We have the same punchline 3 times, only to have the last iteration of it be extreme and silly. But you can't make sexual assault silly. You could have Penchas fighting off these people, have him disgusted at someone coming on to him, and say something silly, have him punch them. We know he can hold his own in a fight.
I will. But it's cash up front. And I know that one can't afford me.
Gross! I'd never think of it, Spider.
That would be funny. At least as funny as the uncomfortable scenes you've put Charlie in, writers. Here's an example of this triplet joke actually working well. This is from the film Some Like It Hot.
What kind of a band is it anyway?
You gotta be under 25.
We could pass for that.
You gotta be blonde.
We could dye our hair.
And you gotta be girls.
We could... No, we couldn't.
Not only is this a good example of the joke, but it has the exact same issue of discussing the trauma people go through whilst forgetting it the next second. The difference is that it can be taken as a marker that these characters aren't learning the lessons that the film is trying to teach us. It's also from 1959, so that changes how these characters had to be written. Go watch this film, though. It's great. Okay. Now we're finally through the slog of the worst thing to exist in Hazbin Hotel. I didn't have a visceral reaction to this scene when I first saw it, as I am now, but it never sat well with me. Giving myself time to ruminate on why has made me settle on this particular moniker, the worst thing to exist in Hazbin Hotel. What I did have more of a visceral dislike of when I first saw it is yet to come. But why I didn't like it is more immediately obvious, so that's probably why it was so visceral. Charlie submits to the court that Angel did everything on Adam's list. He protected Nifty while sacrificing his good time, a selfless act. He stopped Nifty from stealing, and finally he stuck it to the man by fighting against his abuser. She asks why he doesn't deserve to be in heaven by their own standards. Sarah looks terrified, as Emily asks,
Yeah, why isn't he here?
This is where we get this bomb.
None of you know what gets someone into heaven?
None of the heaven-born creatures know what gets a living soul into heaven. Sarah demands that they stop this line of questioning, insisting that a soul getting into heaven is evidence enough that they're worthy. She focuses on keeping the souls that do make it up here safe. We'll go on to see this as her driving motivation, and it even clouds her judgment. Emily goes into a musical number, and this is the thing I mentioned got a visceral reaction from me. This number has some amazing bits, but overall, I don't like it. Emily questions turning her back on souls that, by their own admission, should have made it into heaven. Sarah counters by vaguely suggesting that it's more complicated than that, and that not everything is spelled in ink, alluding to the fact that even the angels don't know the rules. This is what fosters the majority of the surveillance and hostility in heaven, not knowing the rules. This means that they have to be kept in line at all times to avoid breaking them. This is why Lucifer is such a boogeyman to them, and why he holds any sway at all. He's the only data point of what happens when you speak out. You get sent to hell. Their only certain rule is don't question the status quo, or you'll end up like Lucifer. Charlie joins in with Emily, their shared naivety and hopeful streak bringing them together. Vaggie warns her away from getting too carried away, but here I'd like to point out that they've only given Stephanie Beatriz, of Encanto fame, one musical number.
Not this once-in-a-lifetime change.
It's just a meeting. This could be bad.
Any soul can change.
Those angels' minds are hard to change.
Everyone
They're bloodthirsty and deranged. Careful, Charlie, keep a cool head.
No!
We can do this, we can build it. Best hotel that you've ever seen.
Every other time she's been in one, she's been speaking to the rhythm. It's criminal. Get Brooklyn Nine-Nine on the phone. I'd like to report a robbery. Sarah then tells Charlie that there's a lot that she doesn't know. Can I just say that I hate the trope of characters vaguely letting their intentions be known and causing conflict through vague allusions rather than resolving conflict through communication? I get like 90% of fiction wouldn't happen without this trope, but it's so frustrating. Now Lute comes in, singing for the first time with an awesome rock backing.
What are we even talking about? Some crack or who fucked up already?
This bit is one of the only good bits of this song. We somewhat reprise Hell is Forever, or at least name drop it. We also see a sustained shot of Charlie's angry demon form here. Adam taunts Charlie by saying that he's going to enjoy the next extermination. Suddenly the tempo and instrumentation shift again as Emily cuts in. She had no idea about the extermination, despite being a seraphim, and the whole courtroom learns this for the first time too, along with Charlie realizing that they didn't know. Adam and Lute seem not too frightened of reprimand, unlike, their boss. Bit of an odd choice. Sarah tries to explain all this again, saying it's for the safety of heaven, but there's this wonderful shot showing the nub of this whole setup. Justify this however you want, you're talking about killing people while flashing caring eyes at us. We keep jarringly switching between meters and instrumentation here too.
Wait! What are you saying? I didn't know. I thought since I'm older, it's my load to shoulder. To think that I admired you, well, I don't need your condescension.
Emily angrily rejects Sarah. We see her form shift into this I-themed one. Again, that theme there. Emily questions Sarah, telling her that all the good intentions in the world don't mean anything in the face of her cruelty, and all this talk of morals and virtue is meaningless when you don't practice what you preach. A good lesson for all religious people to take from this show. Suddenly the best part of this number comes in when Charlie and Emily both team up to cheer out Sarah, and the very concept of heaven itself.
That's what the fuck I've been saying. If hell is forever, then heaven must be alive.
This staccato instrumentation, one after the other, and dramatic delivery is amazing. But we cut away from it by completely changing tempo again.
Make the wretched suffer just to kill them again. I was told not to trust in angels.
This number is so hectic, and not in a way that helps its vibe of being dramatic, it's just annoying. We don't sit with any of these sections long enough to enjoy them. Again, I don't like being this negative, but this is just my reaction. Story of the entire show, though, we don't sit long enough to enjoy these parts that are so good. Charlie finishes up by saying that she was right not to trust angels. Vaggie tries to get her to backpedal here, but Charlie shows her how she's sown the seeds of uncertainty in the crowd. She's doing a dad proud here. Here we see Adam drops the bomb that Vaggie is an angel too, just to throw Charlie off, and in the pause that this creates, Sarah ends the number by reaching the judgment that this whole session has been a terrible idea and the souls cannot be redeemed. Besides the disjointedness of this number, the peaks of glory hidden away from us before they get to shine, there's another reason I dislike this number. It's time for Music Theory with a C-grade student. Yes, I did GCSE music and only got a C in it, but I like to think that I have a minor baseline in the understanding of music theory and history. I think autism kind of helps in this way, as a lot of music boils down to patterns and theories that I can kind of wrap my head around. Not to mention watching higher-tier musical theory explanations on YouTube being explained to me out of an academic setting, I tend to pick it up somewhat quickly. Still, take everything I say with a pile of salt. And on top of that, this is all my opinion, so beware. I'm not the best with music theory, as I've said. when she dominant on my Phrygian till I blast beat, I don't know. You've heard me mention a YouTuber called Sideways a few times in these reviews, and I urge you to check out their channel through the card in the top right or in the description. I've been a fan of their work for a while. They explain musicals through a theoretical lens in a way that a layman like myself can pick up on. They've done videos on how Cats the musical works but the film version doesn't, how the musical structure of Sweeney Todd gives away the ending, and how Les Mis doesn't work in the film version as well as the play did, among many other things. Invariably skip to many different parts of a Sideways video and he'll be explaining the concepts of opera. Now, some of you may switch your brain off the moment I mention opera like I do, but listen, it's important. The very foundation of modern musical theatre begins with opera and how people got so bored of it that they decided to shake up the formula. Sideways is very fair to opera, while some fans of the art form will defend its every little flaw as part of the experience. Sideways tends to harp on the issues of opera, mainly on how these aforementioned fans do an unreasonable amount of gatekeeping. Ever wonder why opera is rarely in the language that you speak? That's because for centuries, snobs have insisted that translating opera is going to diminish the artistry of the play, whilst opening it up to the unwashed masses. It's a whole thing. Opera doesn't want you involved, and that's why I don't ever want to get involved with it, really. In opera, there are two main forms of songs, aria and recitative. Sometimes recitative, it's language. Aria is, in essential terms, I am so emotional right now that I'm going to belt my feelings to the back of this music hall. Recitative is, let's sing exactly what we're doing to the beat of the music and what's going on around us. In the 1800s, we got people being so annoyed by opera being so gate-kept, and by this very strange setup of these two songs, that they made it funny, and they completely replaced recitative with dialogue. 'Cause yeah, you could just say all this and have it be just as impactful. Keep that phrase in mind for later. Here's an example of recitative from Les Mis to give you an example of what we're looking at.
Now bring me prisoner 24601. Your time is up and your parole's begun. You know what that means? Yes, it means I'm free.
No deeper emotion in these lines than what you could show us with a character's face. Jean is saying, I'm glad to be out of prison.
Yes, it means I'm free.
And Javert is saying, I hate and dehumanize criminals so much that I will fight them while Paris burns around me.
Yes, 24601. My name is Jean Valjean. And I'm Javert.
It's not very subtle. He literally refuses to call Jean by his name, except to use his own name as a threat in response.
Do not forget my name. Do not forget me.
The other element I hate about recitative is that it rarely rhymes, is in an irregular rhythm and measure, and is just speaking in tempo with the music, as a guiding force as to where the pitch and timbre of the vocals are going. It's an absolute mess. We all know what aria is, though. Here's a good example from Hazbin. They're singing about what's happening or what has happened, but the vocals alone carry the emotion behind the words, and then they go on to explain these emotions and their motivations. It's the musical equivalent of a dejected look from a film character over at a rusty weapon in the corner of a forgotten room. It tells you everything, with something very short and succinct. Comedic opera and operetta eventually evolved into modern musical theatre. We get wonderful comedies from this period, like the works of Gilbert and Sullivan. In these shows, people only sing when the emotion is too much for talking anymore, and if they do sing about something unrelated to the emotional core of the show, they sing it emotionally. In this number from Pinafore, we hear Sir Joseph's pride at being a member of the Navy and being such a high rank, whilst making a political statement about how easy it was to get there.
I grew so rich that I was sent by a pocket of butter into Parliament. I always voted in my party's call. I never thought of thinking for myself at all. He never thought of thinking for himself at all.
It tells us all that we need to know about him. He's not very smart, he's lazy, and is very happy to be so. It's a great character introduction while serving political commentary from the writers about the state of Victorian imperial systems.
I thought so little they rewarded me by making me the ruler of the Queen's Navy.
He thought so little they rewarded me by making you the ruler of the Queen's Navy.
As I've said in the past episodes, and this is a phrase that I took from Sideways, who credits it to the leaders of the Disney Renaissance back in the 90s, when emotion becomes too much for talking, you sing. When it becomes too much for singing, you dance. This is a formula for musicals that works amazingly, and this is why the 90s Disney movies did so well. I've talked about this formula when describing how I hate that the songs just start in this series. Even if it's not a big statement of intention or a backseat belter about how your mother just died or something, you can sing emotionally about what's going on, and it lets us learn more about the characters and the world. Now that we've covered that, let's look back at this song.
What are you saying? Let me get this straight. You go down there and kill those poor souls. You didn't know.
It's mostly exposition. All of the emotional moments in this song are the best parts, but it's padded by sung exposition, by narration, stuff we already know and that the characters could have just said. Say it with me, gang. You could have just said this and have it be just as impactful. Most of this song is something that can be said to the audience or even shown through subtle facial hints. They've done this before, in the same scene even. But even obvious, hold the camera on a person looking dejected kind of moments would work. Instead, they tell us what's going on and how they feel in this musical number. Show, don't tell. Rule 1 of film class. As such, this musical moment fails as a musical and as a visual medium. Now, I understand that musicals have different rules from films, but it fails on both fronts. The pace and measure of this number is all over the place too, like a recitative number. Not to mention, they try and shore up the gaps caused by the emotional and narrative failings of the song by using specific instrumentation for different characters. This is a wonderful idea if the song didn't have so much else going on, because now it's not just disjointed, it's cluttered. As I've said, the emotional moments are the best parts. Luke and Adam's attack against Charlie.
What are we even talking about? Some crack or who fucked up already?
Charlie and Emily's defiance against Sarah.
If hell is forever, then heaven must be alive. Emily.
This number could have just been Adam and Luke rebuking or taunting Charlie with their verses, but the song should have stopped when they revealed extermination to the crowd. Then Charlie, Sarah, and Emily could have had an emotional number after the court took a brief recess about how all this isn't fair, and then Adam can interject by bringing up Vaggie's past. That would have been much tighter. This is the first episode to add fuel to my personal theory that this show has a 2-song per episode quota. This number could have been 2 different musical numbers. Get rid of St. Peter's number, and you would still have filled the quota. And then you would have also made the song much less of a problem and made it more emotionally impactful. If you're debating if a number has any overall value or are rushing to find something to write about, then don't add a musical number, or go right back to the drawing board with the whole episode. This feels like it belongs at the end of season 1, with much more build-up behind this episode. Give us 2 episodes in heaven dealing with this trial, talking about all the different angles of it more thoroughly. Spend more time in hell before Charlie and Vaggie go. Have Lucifer coaching Charlie about what to expect. Give us more of his backstory on how he fell and this whole heaven system in general. And this would also fix another issue that I have with the show. The fact that Lucifer said he'd be there to support Charlie in the last episode, but he's completely gone from the next 3 episodes, and then halfway through the 3rd episode, he only just comes to help Charlie to defend the hotel from extermination near the end of the battle. We'll get there, don't worry. As it stands, this song is too cluttered by exposition and baffling structural problems for the emotional parts to shine through, in my opinion. I felt nothing when Charlie learned about Vaggie because I was too overstimulated and confused by the end. I'll make the controversial statement that if we can't improve these numbers in the way that I've already described, then this episode would have been perfectly suited to have no musical numbers at all. Have it be just a story and exposition episode, and that would have been better than this. Anyway, Adam sends them both back to hell, and Sarah and Emily have a moment of introspection. Sarah finally begins to communicate with Emily about why she's kept all of this from her, but it's still not enough of an explanation, and it still boils down to shut up and accept it, which we know Emily's not going to do. I like that we see Sarah's anger or anxiety represented by these eyes. I just wish we knew more about what it meant. Another overall problem in the show that I'll get to at the end of my summary is giving characters cool quirks but never explaining to us in a consistent way the reason why they're there. I'll get more into this in episode 8 and the wrap-up, but it's mostly about Alistair. Sarah does the trope of an older sibling defending the younger one by hiding important stuff from them, more specifically taking on all the responsibility rather than sharing the load or talking it out. Since I've mentioned Encanto earlier, I'll mention the first example that came to mind, is this trope given flesh, Luisa Madrigal. We end on this admittedly nice shot of Emily thoughtfully looking at Adam's list. So, that was the worst episode in the show, bar none. It's the episode that has all of my production quibbles at the dead centre. I've neglected to mention a lot of them since they were so ignorable up until this point. And I was saving it for my wrap-up video, really. As I said, this episode nearly made me bail on the whole show. Episodes 7 and 8 were so good that they reminded me of the potential that this show tends to have, and if it learns from the mistakes of this episode, I would be ecstatic. Those episodes still have their flaws, of course, but they were good enough to give me hope. As for the lore, this episode does give us a few juicy nuggets. Obviously, they confirm the fan theory that Vaggie is an angel, but it doesn't feel like much of a reveal to me, as I mentioned. Honestly, the most they do with this is a character conflict that's all but resolved in the next episode. Her abilities, or the opinions of the rest of the cast, barely touched on. As for lore implications, there aren't that many. This reveal only proves to us that angels can fall, which we already knew, though it isn't necessarily the same thing. Vaggie was injured and left for dead in hell. She didn't die and end up there. She wasn't cast down like Lucifer. She never died at all, like some of us thought. Some of us were always wondering what she did to get into hell, but she didn't die and end up there. She was cast down. For all we know, she's still worthy of being in heaven, and only Adam and Lute were the ones to decide that she's not. Hell, Adam tries to invite her back. We do learn in episode 8 that Adam has some say in who gets into heaven, so it's not all about being worthy. If my understanding of Lilith's standing as a hellish being is right too, that being that she is a sinner, then we know that he can allow sinners into heaven, not just angels or hellborns. It's also clear that visits between the two realms is relatively easy for these beings, so seemingly the only thing stopping Sarah from allowing the worthy sinners who do change back into the fold is the worry that they'll sow dissent, or the worry of her breaking the rules by doing this. One thing where I can't tell if it's an oversight or a choice that they've made is that Adam and Lute can break the ill-defined rules of heaven without any fear of reprimand, but the highest power that we've seen in heaven so far is constantly terrified of some good old-fashioned Old Testament justice being wielded against her and hers. Besides that, and learning that heaven doesn't know a thing about its own rules, as well as the fact that the exterminations are kept quiet, two things that barely affect the plot, but at least shore up some of the world-building, not much else is learned here. On the topic of world-building, the eye motif made me realise that at times that is a weaker element of the show. We don't really know much about the world of the Helliverse. All we learn in this episode is that heaven doesn't know anything about heaven, which is interesting, but of absolutely no help. Sometimes I wonder if things are kept purposefully vague for the sake of fan theory crafting. It's a good marketing strategy up to a point, and it helps keep people invested, but a terrible long-term strategy for having a consistent, interesting world. This is the level of cynicism that this episode has lowered me to. Production. This episode has some pretty good animation, like the rest of the show, with the odd foible here or there like frozen expressions or really smooth animation followed by strangely stiff animation. It kind of reminds me of a video by the aforementioned Dan Olsen about Ralph Bakshi's animated The Lord of the Rings movie, in which he talks about the rotoscoped animation being very fluid, but the moment that these characters are still for even a second, that fluidity is put in sharp contrast with the stillness of the average animation cell. It's a similar vibe, in that the contrast is so sharp that just these odd moments tend to stick out. As I've said, though, it's on par with the rest of the series animation-wise. I will say the visuals in the musical numbers are less impressive in this episode, compared to past musical numbers. Plus, people online have complained that the men in the show get all the interesting musical numbers, and the women tend to have a sort of let's move around in one space and sing philosophy to theirs. I'd like to counter this point by showing you that Happy Day in Hell gives us a tour of the streets of the Pride Ring, which is visually interesting. And if you mean that the fun abstract scenes are rarely given to the women, let me remind you of the fun and thematically relevant transitions and colour variations in Vaggie and Carmilla's number in episode 3. What I will say is that the more bombastic characters in the show tend to have the expressive numbers like this, and as such we see more creative visuals there. But the fact that they're men, I think, can be chalked up to coincidence. The fact that Vaggie, Charlie, Carmilla, Velvet, Emily and Sarah, and even Rosie in later episodes only have minor roles in these numbers, or have more static visuals in their numbers, can be put down less to gender and more to the same element that underlies most of my issues with the show, and this episode in particular. This show's writing is phenomenal and well-crafted most of the time. There have been numerous occasions in the show where I felt that important characters and their stories have been left by the wayside to give space for the bombastic, fan-favourite characters to shine more. Overall, the writing in this episode stinks of rushed deadlines, potential rewrites, or even no rewrite. On top of this all, it reads as somehow padded and too rushed at the same time. How a show with several years of development behind it can be rushed is beyond me, and I don't mean to be snarky about that. I mean it is literally beyond my comprehension. I do not know what goes into a show like this. I can't comprehend it. It takes me several months to find the energy to edit an audiobook chapter sometimes, so I can't speak to the sort of efforts and pressure that these creatives have to go through. But I have to wonder if all that time was spent in back and forths with corporate meddlers changing the story. It's happened before. A lot. We know Angel, Alistair and the other fan-fave characters are the moneymakers, just from the amount of merch that sports their faces. I have to wonder if this took priority over the plot, or if the plot was still a relative important thing. I also think that these bombastic fan-favourite characters being the forefront has nothing to do with their gender, as I've mentioned. At the least, this whole situation reads to me like anything that wasn't story-related had to contain one of the big-ticket characters. As such, characters such as Charlie and Vaggie fell off to the side, and the only reason Vaggie got any character at all was because she has lore-relevant backstory. I would argue that Charlie has received negative character development, as the personality presented to us in the pilot is somewhat altered, and her only motivation and personality trait is essentially to keep the show running. Literally, to keep Hazbin Hotel alive. As I said in the last episode, her trauma background has been thoroughly rewritten. Lucifer is not the abusive character that he was in that pilot, and her depressive elements have been much, much more muted in the actual series. I wonder if Lucifer's personality was changed from an abusive father to a ditzy but doting hunk because of his marketability. We've seen, now that the show is out, the unreasonable amount of hate that the fandom has for characters who have been shown to be abusive. Side note, but Valentino is a fictional moth demon. Do not harass or assault cosplayers of him to defend a fictional spider. You actual reality-deprived weirdos. Go touch grass. Back on topic, I don't wonder how much was changed to put these characters in the forefront. The result is that the plot takes centre stage alongside the most lovable characters, and yet the protagonists and the other interesting side stories are just edged off to the sides of the stage. This would be like if you made a Star Wars movie about Darth Vader and Darth Maul, had to tortuously rewrite canon to make them both meet, and then have Luke Skywalker and Ben Kenobi just have one conversation about how Ben knew them both in the past. I'm not good at constructing these kinds of metaphors, but that's all I got. This potentially rushed production cycle, or at least poorly planned pacing, leads to knock-on effects, as I have mentioned. The explosive denouement of the series feels like the end of the 3rd season or something. The big show-stopping lore reveals and musical numbers in this episode feel hollow and misplaced. As I said, the plot elements feel more at home halfway through or even at the end of the next season, not in the 1st season. Angel's character development with Val is very wholesome, and I love the fact that this is happening. It's wonderfully done, but where do we go from here? In 5 episodes, he's gone from being under his thumb to having some autonomy under that thumb, to Val caring more about world domination in episode 8 than his usual business. The rate we're going now, this whole plotline could be capped off in a single episode in the next series. I also feel rushing this element is kinda making a Hallmark movie of this plot point. Now you may be saying, AJ, after the horror that Angel's gone through, doesn't he deserve to get a break? And yes, of course, I agree to that. No one wants to see him free of his literal demons than me, but I need to ask, how often does one intervention work in real life? This man has been living like this since the 40s, and I'm to believe that one pep talk from a man that he previously hated and one musical number is enough to make him this defiant? This abuser has had enough control over him to make him press one of his only friends who's ever cared about him by playing to her trauma in order to upset her, and he just decides to fight this guy after one song? This is probably because of the rushed element that I mentioned. It's been months since Loser Baby, but it feels like a week, maybe. This can all be fixed if, in the next series, Val does something to Angel that makes him backslide. That would be a very realistic thing. Maybe he puts some horrible ideas in his head, starts introducing more torture into Angel's work, and reminds him why he's scared of Val. Follows him around outside of work, or even, God forbid, begins carrying an angelic weapon. Maybe he says he got it from the battle at the hotel, blames Charlie for letting it fall into his hands. While I don't want Angel to be under Val's thumb, it would be more of a tasteful and realistic depiction of trauma if this whole situation doesn't just go away after some musical number and become reduced to a joke. It just reminds me of that line from Zootopia if you're American.
But sir, life isn't some cartoon musical where you sing a little song and your insipid dreams magically come true. So let it go.
Not to mention, in the rush to show off Angel's defiant character arc, we ignore the importance of Charlie's arc when she doesn't react as heavily to him having an outburst to her. The whole world building of Heaven is put aside so that we can see more of Angel. And finally, most egregiously of all, Pentius's arc and his traumatic assault at the club is put aside as well. Spoiler for episode 8, but Pentius is the only Hazbin resident to make it to heaven. We have seen little of the reasoning behind this, besides that he agreed not to bring weapons into the hotel and then had a crush on a toxic beer before noticeably and nobly sacrificing himself for his friends. That is a baseline level character development, and we don't even really see why he would choose to sacrifice himself. Instead of focusing on this character more, to make the one good thing the show does for him more impactful, we actively ignore his emotions and character moments, because he's the silly joke character, and we need to focus on Angel being the one to make good strides in progressing on the righteous path. Seriously, man, justice for Pentius. While this element is a problem in the micro, I'd prefer more in-depth stories angle, it leads into more macro problems, like the aforementioned tasteless sexual assault humour that was glossed over due to this rushed and negligent approach to characters. Of course, aside from the odd pacing being at the forefront of this episode, we also see that the musical numbers in this episode, while being competent on a technical level, as in when it comes to vocalists and instrumentalists having talent and ability, the construction of the songs bug me to a degree. The choices made are bizarre and aren't really my kind of thing personally, for the reasons I rambled about at length. I know the songwriters can make good stuff, they always do, and as I've mentioned, there's good stuff here. To use my earlier Star Wars analogy, it's like getting a figure of Jar Jar Binks in Darth Vader's suit with Jango Fett's backpack and Watto's voice as an electronic feature. Look at all of these good parts, but why did you have to put it together like this? Alongside these less enjoyable elements, just odd choices. The voice actors here, non-controversially, are amazing, as always, and it pleases me to finally be positive again after this slog of an episode. Once more, I hate being this negative about anything, and I'm trying to temper it by finding any positive elements I can find. Christina Alabado as Cherry Bomb brings a wonderfully spunky anarchism to Cherry that is necessary for that character. She also makes her an abrasive and insufferable character, as was the brief that was handed to her. Whilst I hate the character, she brings all the elements to her that she needed to. Her accent adds a lot to her portrayal, as there's something about an Australian or Kiwi accent that really lends a rough-hewn quality to the character. Odd aside, really, but both people who have played this character have had a name beginning with Christ, with a K and a Y. That's an odd coincidence. Patina Miller as Sarah is able to capture the air of a concerned older sister and a caring mother with a deftness that is admirable, and her ability to switch the caring nature off to put on a more cold and calculated mask to cover up her worries and insecurities is also very impressive. I love characters like this, but she shows an underlying pathos that most characters like this lack. The best example I can think of when it comes to someone turning off the front-facing facade to show an underlying dead-eyed cynicism is Giancarlo Esposito as Gustavo Fring in Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul. Unlike characters like him, Miller is able to show off that this whole crime against nature thing she's involved with does weigh on her shoulders and her soul heavily, and she's genuinely thinking about what to do and whether it's right. We don't see much more of her in this series, but I would love to. Her singing voice also matches both of these vibes very well, as you hear her underlying uncomfortable mental battle whilst trying to come off as kind, especially in this line in Welcome to Heaven.
After you see our realm, you'll never want to go back down. Of course it is just temporary. I'm sorry you can't stay.
Trying to temper Emily's enthusiasm whilst doing so softly, and you can kind of hear that underlying anxiety around demons being in heaven. Shobha Narayan not getting a thumbnail portrait on Amazon's X-Ray annoys me, personally, because she's also an amazing actor in this show. She brings a wonderful energy and optimism to Emily that cannot be understated, able to match and enhance the energy of Henningsen in her performance of Charlie. I'd love to see more of them bouncing off each other. The main issue I have with that is that because of the horrors revealed in this episode, the rushed nature of the plot not giving her time to retain her innocence, I think Emily wouldn't be able to relax and vibe with Charlie anymore, and that's a shame. This, however, is also captured perfectly by Narayan. This loss of Emily's innocence and her naive, starry-eyed defiance against the heavenly system, also matching Henningsen's Charlie. I'd love equally to see these two battling, intellectually and verbally of course, side by side against this injustice in future episodes. Her crazy Snow White vibrato in her singing voice weirdly enough mirrors Elsie Lovelock's version of Charlie's singing voice in the pilot.
But she was right, Sarah. She showed us the soul can improve. He saw the light, Sarah. At the end of the rainbow, there's happiness. And to find it, how often I've tried.
It must be hard to essentially be a mirror and a reflection of another character in the show, as it means that all of your merits have to be directly compared with theirs. But on her own terms, she's an amazing actor and singer. I think she would have made an equally good Charlie, actually. I wish this wasn't the last we heard of her in the show. Stephanie Beatriz unfortunately doesn't get much wiggle room in this episode, or in the next few episodes, to be able to show off her talent whilst singing or even while expressing her feelings about this whole plot reveal. In fact, she has very little reaction to this information being revealed, and so does everyone. I know she's capable of powerful emotional moments in both voice and song, but the episode and series frequently deprived her of this. Erika Henningsen is able to shine a little more as Charlie, being enhanced by Narayan's Emily, and as such the plot provides her with a moment to show off her more emotional repertoire, and her vocal performance more than keeps stride. She's amazing as usual. Blake Roman finally adds more of a softer side, a caring approach to angel dust in this episode, as well as a stoic defiance in the face of adversity. This is wonderful to see in this character, and his talent makes it all the more stunning to witness. He goes above and beyond and shows both a vocal control and ability that is impressive. Alex Brightman still has an amazing capacity to create characters through his voice. Whilst most people might have said that Fizzarolli is just Beetlejuice's voice, Adam and Penchas prove that he's capable of so much more. He's able to bring humour to these characters' voices flawlessly. Here I'll also shout out the editors, as comedic timing is a mixture of vocal performance and editing, so all those who put these lines and scenes together in a correct order should get the credit too. The one problem I have with Brightman's performance isn't exactly his fault. He's clearly capable of intimidation and sinister tones, we've seen this before, but he frequently has to resort to his comedic side due to the way that the character is written. Penchas as well, of course. I wish he had more room to stretch and not just be seen as a clown. Keith David leaves a lot of his surly tone behind in this episode and embraces a more calming and comforting, friendly Husk, and I really enjoy that. He's able to both show off the pain and frustration that his role demands, able to make it both sound like he's annoyed at Cherry for calling him out specifically, and make Husk sound like he's concerned for Angel, all in the same breath. It's now at the point where I've begun reading fan comics and imagining Keith's voice reading Husk's lines. After my earlier uncertainty about him playing this role, he's cemented himself in my mind as this version of Husk. No shade being thrown at Mick Lauer, but he never got to show his compassionate side. I'm sure he could manage it, seeing what I've seen of his portrayal of Abakio in JoJo, but this compassion in Husk's character is now firmly a Keith David thing in my mind. Jessica Vosk is still amazing as Lute, and I'll have more to say about her soon, but she's still so delectably devious in the show that I can't sing her praises enough. Either singing or speaking, she's able to show off Lute's maniacal dogmatism and cruelty. In future episodes, she and Lute show more facets of this character, but right now these facets are already as well cut as those in a diamond. Joel Perez still excels at slimy evil and petulant tantrums in this episode, and seeing the irrational response from the fandom to this particular character, I can both praise him and say his portrayal is working as intended, and also apologise for the hate it will bring him. Seriously, touch grass, Hazbin fans. I need to praise Kimiko Glenn more, to be honest. She's amazing at capturing the frantic insanity that is Nifty. She's one of the only characters where I don't want to see more of her emotional repertoire extended into tragedy or normalcy, since her addictive mania is so intoxicating that I can't get enough of it. She's just so good at being a little gremlin. Finally, Darren Criss as St. Peter is fun. He captures this vibe that the character needed. He's an overly cheesy, upbeat Boy Scout of a character, and he brings all that energy to the mic. As much as I have mixed feelings about this particular character, his performance is not up for debate. His singing and speaking voice is great. He captures that current year pop star vibe in his singing voice that St. Peter needed, and this brings him even more of a goody two-shoes, never stepping a foot out of the comfort zone kind of vibe. All I can say about this episode in closing is that the worst is behind us. The next 2 episodes are amazing, and I wish to all that is unholy that the show learns a lot of valuable lessons from the failings of this episode. I hope Season 2 doesn't have an episode like this. That said, I'm looking forward to talking about Episode 7, so I'll see you there.